So back in 2011, I bought my first delay pedal. It was the Eventide Time Factor, an absolute classic unit. And at the time, I didn't know much about delay. I just knew that there was one sound in that pedal that I ended up using most often, and it was the tape delay setting. Cut to 14 or 15 years later, and now I have a small collection of actual tape echoes here in my studio that I use all the time, not just for guitar, but for drums and on vocals and synths. So today's video is gonna be all about Tape Echo 101. I'm gonna show you a few of my units that I use here at the house. I'm gonna show you how they work, the idea behind tape echo or tape delay. But before we jump into that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Reverb. Reverb is a great place if you're searching for a used or vintage tape echo unit. In fact, 2 of my vintage units I purchased on Reverb over the years. But it's not just used and vintage gear. Reverb has a massive selection of new gear from sellers and stores all over the world. In the description box down below, I'm going to have links to all of the stuff that I talk about today. Those will be affiliate links. So if you purchase something through there, I earn a small commission, which I greatly appreciate. It doesn't cost you any extra. And if you are in the market for a vintage tape echo, maybe you want to sell some of your gear that you've got lying around, well, Reverb is a great place to do that as well. In fact, that's how I bought my first tape echo, my Multivox, which I'll show you in a minute. Had some pedals lying around, put them up on Reverb, sold them, and then found the Multivox on Reverb as well, and just traded gear for gear, basically. So check out the links in the description box down below. Huge thank you to Reverb for sponsoring today's video. With all that out of the way, let's talk about tape. So let's talk about tape. So at its most basic, magnetic tape is a thin plastic film, and on this film is printed a medium. It's iron oxide. Basically, picture millions and millions and millions of tiny little particles of kind of rust, basically. And these particles are sharp. They're sort of needle shaped, and they get printed onto this very thin plastic film backing, and that is how we get tape. How do we get audio from the world or from our guitar or our voice onto the tape? Well, to do that, we need some kind of a tape machine. And the way this works is as audio is generated by my voice speaking into a microphone or me striking a guitar string above a pickup, a very weak electrical signal is being generated by the diaphragm in this microphone or the pickup on my guitar. Then we send that very tiny signal into some kind of amplifier. We then take that amplified signal and send it into the tape machine. And in a tape machine, there's a component called a record head. And this component's job is to take that signal and convert it into an electromagnetic wave, essentially. We then pass the tape over that wave, and it uses that magnetic field to imprint a copy, a picture almost, of the sound onto the tape. And it does this by using that magnetic field to rearrange the magnetic particles on the actual tape itself. Those needles will all start to align one way or another, and this is how we get sound on tape. The way I like to visualize it is think of like a waveform in your DAW. It essentially looks like that, but in tiny, tiny magnetic particles on the tape. Now, when we're done recording, we need a way to play back the tape. So to do that, we need something called a playback head, which is essentially a record head in reverse. We send the tape over the playback head, and it's sensing the magnetic printout on the medium, on the tape itself, and it's turning that magnetic signal back into an electric signal. And we do the whole process in reverse. We take that tiny, tiny electrical signal, we amplify it, and then we send it through speakers, which a speaker is kind of just a microphone in reverse. So that's the basics of tape recording. But how do we get tape echo from this? Well, it dates back to some early recording pioneers, people like Les Paul, who in the late 1940s and 1950s were experimenting with tape machines. And they pretty quickly figured out that if you take two tape machines and you have one machine recording and another machine playing back, you get an echo. And depending on how far apart in space, how physically far apart those two machines are, you get a shorter or longer echo. And thus, slapback echo was born. Okay, so this is my Multivox MX201. This is the first tape echo unit that I bought 4 or 5 years ago. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of Multivox or any of these units. For that, I would highly recommend the JHS video on this topic. In fact, it was watching that video that led me to go on Reverb and buy this unit. And of all of the units that I currently own, this one I think still is my favorite, and we'll get into why in just a second. Now, we understand how tape works, but let's talk about how an actual tape echo unit works. If you look in the top here, you're gonna see a pretty interesting mechanism. We have a loop of tape that is sort of continuously snaking around the machine. And in fact, you can kind of hear it in the microphone. It's that high-pitched kind of like hissing sound. Now, what's happening here is the tape is being passed over a series of tape heads. First and foremost, we have what's called the erase head. Now, we need this erase head first because if we weren't erasing the tape as it enters into the delay head or tape head sort of array here, we would end up with repeats that would start building up on each other over and over and over again to the point where it would just be a cacophony of sound. Now, interestingly, this tape echo actually has a mode, a little switch here called sound on sound, which does that. It basically bypasses the erase head so that as I start to play, my repeats and everything I've played onto the tape just gets recorded over and built on top of. It can be a really cool effect. So what happens is the tape gets erased. So anything that is already recorded on there, previous delay repeats or anything, gets wiped. And then it goes to the record head. Now, as I'm sending signal into the box, for instance, play my guitar, this record head is printing that signal onto the tape. Then from there, it goes on to a series of 4 different playback heads, and each one of these different playback heads is set at a specific distance away from the record head. This is what gives us our delay time. The farther away a playback head is from the record head, the longer the delay is going to be, because it's going to take a longer time for the tape to travel from the record head to that specific playback head. This is what that sounds like. So on the front panel of the Multi-Echo here, I have these 4 buttons labeled Echo, and these are my 4 different playback heads. I can turn them on and off individually. So let's start with the first playback head. This is the one that's closest to the record head. That's a slapback echo. This is similar to what Les Paul and those early engineers would have been doing in the studio. They would have gotten essentially one repeat, one echo, because there was one playback head on the next machine. But listen to what happens when I move on to the next playback head. Same thing, we get an echo, but it's a little farther apart. Then the third playback head. And the fourth playback head. Now you hear how that playback head is a little kind of tinny sounding. I actually think this machine needs to be serviced and that playback head might need to be replaced. Now the cool thing about a lot of these tape echo units is that I can pick and choose multiple variations of how many playback heads that I want to use at the same time. For instance, let's hear playback head 1 and playback head 3. Now I start to get these sort of like rhythmic multi-tap delays. Let's hear 2 and 4. Let's hear 1, 3, and 4. That's kind of cool. Now there's one other way to control the delay time, and that is this knob right here that says delay time. And what's actually happening with this knob is it's controlling the speed of the motor. So it's making the tape run either faster or slower over the tape head arrays here. And I can actually kind of use that to an interesting effect. And now my delay repeats have slowed down. Conversely, I can go way up. So that's the basics of how tape echo works, but you might notice that right now we're only getting one repeat. We're just getting one echo. What if I want more? What if I want those sort of long, lush tape echo trails? Well, how does that work? Well, here we have a control called Echo Repeat. And what this is doing is essentially splitting the signal recorded onto the tape in two. You can think of it as like an A path and a B path. So far, we've only been listening to the A path, which is the direct signal that's been printed onto the tape and then played back, and that's it. Tape goes around, gets erased, and we do the whole process over again. But as I turn up this Echo Repeat knob, what's happening is the tape echo is actually, well, now it's oscillating. What happens is the tape echo actually siphons off some of that recorded signal and feeds it back to the record head in conjunction with the signal that's coming in. This is where we start to get those longer and longer repeats. So let's go with head 3 here so we can get just kind of a normal delay. Now, as I push up the Echo Repeat control, you hear we start to get more feedback, but it's not the same interval. It's feeding back faster. And that's because of these 4 switches here under the repeat setting. So these 4 switches are controlling basically the rate at which the split signal, the B signal, is being fed back onto the record head. So to get more of like a normal delay sound, I'm going to go to the 3 setting. And now we have kind of that classic tape echo sound. Now I want you to listen to something here. You hear how the delay repeats are sort of degrading? They're getting warmer and they're getting darker with each repeat. That is like the classic tape echo sound. What's happening there is every time we record onto the tape, we're losing a little bit of quality, right? And that B signal path is getting reprinted onto the tape with a little quality loss. And then it's getting red, printed again. Little more quality loss, red, printed again. This happens, this is called generation loss, and we're hearing the generation loss in real time with the echo repeats. That is like the characteristic sound of tape echo, that warm, sort of distorted, crunchy delay repeats as they start to trail off. Now, I can push the repeat control even further. And you can really hear it start to degrade. Now, you hear that like little pitch drop, that little variation? That's part of why I think this one is my favorite machine out of all of them, because it's actually got some flaws. There's a problem with the motor where occasionally it'll just like slow down and speed up really quick. And we hear that in the delay, and it comes through in a really musical way. Whenever I use this to record with, I always love capturing those little moments, those little flaws, that warble, that wow and flutter. It's part of what gives this sound its character. It's like its signature. It's the fact that it's not perfect. It's a little messed up. This machine kind of doesn't function all that well, and I don't want to fix it because I like that flaw. So my plan is just to keep using it until it doesn't work anymore and then get it fixed. Now, if I continue to push the repeat control up, we start to get oscillation. And what's happening there is essentially the B signal path is loud enough that it's just continually sort of reprinting on itself, and it's creating a feedback loop. That's another cool effect to use. Something I do with tape echo units all the time, and even the pedal versions, is push the repeats up so it starts to oscillate, so it starts to feed back basically, and then you can play with the delay time control and have a wild effect. Okay, so we've got a different tape echo here. I'm wearing a different shirt. It's a different day. It's continuity error. This is my Space Echo, my RE-201. This is arguably one of, if not the most famous tape echo units out there. This I actually got a couple years ago as a gift from my wife. She got this for me for Christmas 2 or 3 years ago, which is incredible. The history and importance of the 201, I think, really can't be overstated. This is, in my opinion, the one to have. If you're gonna have one tape echo unit in your studio or in your collection, I would search around and find a good example of an RE-201. Now, I'm not gonna go super deep into the history of the 201. For that, check out the JHS video that I've got linked down below. Now, much like the Multivox that we just looked at, this has a similar sort of tape head array. In fact, the Multivox was directly competing with the 201. They were kind of going after each other. At least Multivox was trying to go after Roland and the success they were having with this unit. And these are not just tape echo units, they're also spring reverbs. And the spring tanks in these Space Echoes sounds amazing. So like the Multivox, we have multiple tape heads, and we can combine those tape heads to get different sort of delay sounds. But unlike the Multivox, instead of the 4 different push buttons, I just have a rotary dial selector here. So if you look at the rotary dial on the left, 1 through 4, it just says repeat. And that means that it's just the tape echo. There's no reverb. But if I go past 4 into numbers 5 and up, we start to combine the reverb and the echo together. And then if I go all the way down to the bottom here, I can run just the reverb only. Now you can hear how dark and kind of mangled the repeats are in this unit, and I think that's for two reasons. One, I probably need to clean the tape heads, and two, I probably need to replace the tape loop. This is the one that I've had for a few years with the unit, but again, this is getting back to that thing that makes Tape Echo special is they are machines. These are mechanical devices that age and have flaws, and they're not going to be the same. They're not going to always sound the same. If you want that, there's plenty of other options. You can use a pedal emulation of a Space Echo even. To me, if you're going to spend the money and put up with the maintenance costs and sort of the inconvenience of having a real Tape Echo, I think you should try and embrace that imperfection, that sort of mechanical nature of it. The idea that it's not always going to sound the same. It's not going to sound quite right. You just sort of take it for what it is in that moment. You record it, commit to it, and move on. I think that's part of what makes these things so special. So the setup I've got going right now is my guitar going into the Quad Cortex, and the Quad Cortex has the Space Echo in one of the effects loops. With basically every Tape Echo unit we've talked about today, the 201, the Multivox, and the brand new Echo Fix that I showed at the beginning of this video, they all have this thing in common, which is part of what makes Tape Echoes special, which is the built-in preamps. You may be familiar with the exotic EP booster, for example, that little great sounding boost pedal a lot of people use on their board. That's emulating the preamp in an Echoplex, another famous, arguably maybe the most famous Tape Echo unit in guitar history. And the reason for that is because these preamps make great overdrives or boosts in front of an amplifier. In fact, one of my favorite things about this particular Space Echo is its preamp. But listen to what happens if I just turn down the delay and the reverb. And in the Quad Cortex right now, I've got the Space Echo sitting right before my amp block. So this is like I would have it just sat in front of an amp. I'd plug my guitar into the Space Echo and the Space Echo into the front of the amplifier. Is just on its own. It's a matchless DC30 model. Now listen to what happens with the current settings I have on the Space Echo. A little warmer, a little dirtier, a little more saturated, but I can push this instrument volume up and start to boost going into the front end using the preamp of the Space Echo. So you're getting a pretty good boost there, but listen to the microphone preamp. There's a lot more gain here. In fact, you hear the big jump in noise there. It sounds amazing on guitar. It sounds amazing on bass. It sounds amazing on vocals or drums. Like the Tape Echo aside, just putting stuff through the front of this thing and cranking the preamp and getting some saturation and some dirt. It's one of my favorite things to do with any of these Tape Echo units. Last but not least, we're going to look at the newest Tape Echo in my collection. This is from a company called Echo Fix. This is the Chorus Echo EFX3. Now, you may have seen Echo Fix around. They're pretty popular now. They're an Australian company, and they got their start repairing Tape Echoes, you know, Space Echoes and Echo Rex and all that kind of stuff. And I guess before too long, they just decided, you know what, we're going to build our own sort of ideal Tape Echo. And that's what this is here. Now, a quick disclaimer, I did not pay for this Echo. They did send this to me for free at no cost. They did not ask for a video or ask for it to be featured in any way, and they're not seeing this before it goes live. It's not like a review or anything, but I do genuinely like this Echo for a few reasons. One, this has a built-in chorus, which whatever analog chorus circuit they have in here, it sounds absolutely incredible. pristine and lush. This is like what a new tape echo sounds like, because it is a brand new tape echo. But the reason I wanted to show you this one is because I think this does sound-on-sound looping better than any of the other units that I have. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned sound-on-sound is what happens whenever we disable the erase head. And so everything that you end up recording on the tape loop just gets repeated, and you start to build up these soundscapes that are, you know, not necessarily in time with each other, but they kind of are, but they sort of repeat and start to fold over on one another. So the way they've done it here on the Chorus Echo is that there's a control up here to disable the erase head. So I'm just gonna start to play, you know, a chord, a little phrase to load up the tape essentially. And then at some point I'm gonna disable the tape head, and you're gonna hear everything that I've played start to come back. Okay, so that's the basics of tape echo. Now, originally I had intended to also add a section on my favorite pedals that sort of emulate tape echoes, but this video is already incredibly long. It's taken me like 4.5 days to shoot and put this together, so maybe I'll make that a second video. If you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments down below. And once again, I want to thank Reverb for sponsoring today's video. All of the links to tape echoes and things that I talked about, as well as some of my favorite pedals that emulate these things, I'll have linked down there as well. And again, those are Reverb affiliate links, which means if you purchase anything through one of those links, I earn a small commission. It doesn't cost you any extra, and it's a great way to help support the channel. Another great way to support the channel, if you're interested, is check out any of my video courses that are linked down below in the description box. A whole bunch of courses that I've made over the last several years that cover a variety of topics with guitar and tone and guitar playing and theory and all that kind of stuff. So check out the courses linked down below, and please subscribe while you're down there. My name is Gretsch. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.